You wake up one morning and step outside. The air feels different, heavier. You breathe in, and something is wrong. Not poison, not smoke, just absence. The sky looks the same. The ground beneath your feet hasn't moved. But somewhere, deep in the machinery of the world, a switch has been flipped, and everything that depends on breath, on oxygen, on the delicate balance between earth and atmosphere, begins to slow down. Not all at once, slowly, like a heartbeat fading. Now imagine that feeling spreading, not across a city, not across a country, across the entire planet. Every forest, every ocean, every creature that crawls, swims, flies, or simply exists in the thin film of life that clings to the surface of this rock spinning through space. Imagine 90% of it dying, not over centuries, not over millennia, but in a window of time so brief that if Earth's history were a calendar year, this moment would be a single terrible hour just before midnight on December 31st. This isn't fiction. This isn't a thought experiment. This happened. And when it did, it nearly erased everything. Pause for a moment. Think about what 90% means. If you're in a room with 10 people, 9 of them gone. If you look at the trees outside your window, 9 out of 10 vanished. If you stood on a beach, watching fish break the surface of the water, imagine that abundance reduced to scattered, desperate survivors. Now, stretch that across every ecosystem on Earth. The forests, the reefs, the deep ocean trenches, the mountain peaks, the polar ice, everything, almost everything, gone. We call this event the Great Dying. Some scientists call it the Permian Triassic extinction. But those names don't carry the weight of what actually happened. Names make things feel distant, academic, like something you study in a textbook and then forget. But this was the closest Earth has ever come to becoming a lifeless planet, a dead world, a place where the story of biology simply stopped. And here's the thing that should unsettle you. We don't fully understand why it happened. We have theories. We have evidence. We can point to volcanic eruptions and shifting continents and changes in ocean chemistry and atmospheric collapse. But the full picture, the exact sequence of dominoes that fell to create this catastrophe, still has gaps, pieces missing. And that absence of certainty makes it more terrifying, not less. Because if we don't fully understand how Earth nearly killed everything once, how can we be sure it won't happen again? Let's go back, not to the event itself, not yet, but to the world before, because to understand how something ends, you need to know what it was before it broke. 252 million years ago, the Earth looked nothing like it does now. If you could stand on its surface, you wouldn't recognize it. The continents weren't scattered across the globe like puzzle pieces. They were fused together into a single, massive landmass called Pangaea, one supercontinent. Imagine every place you've ever heard of, every country, every mountain range, every desert, all pressed together into one enormous island, surrounded by a single, unimaginable ocean called Panthalassa. The climate was extreme. The interior of Pangaea, far from any moderating ocean breeze, was scorching. Deserts stretched for thousands of miles. Monsoons battered the coasts. The poles were cold, but not frozen like today. Ice existed, but it wasn't the dominant force it would become later. Life had adapted to this world. It thrived. Forests of strange, ancient trees covered the wetter regions. In the oceans, reefs built by creatures that no longer exist stretched across shallow seas, and on land, the ancestors of dinosaurs were just beginning to emerge. This was the Permian period, a time of strange beauty. The insects were enormous. Dragonflies with wingspans as wide as a hawk, millipedes the length of your arm. The seas were filled with trilobites, ancient armored creatures that had survived for hundreds of millions of years. On land, there were synapsids, the distant relatives of mammals, some of them massive, some of them small and quick. Life had diversified. It had spread into nearly every available niche. Earth was full, and then, slowly at first, the world began to unravel. It started in what is now Siberia. Deep beneath the surface, something was stirring. Magma, unimaginable quantities of it, began to push upward, not in a single explosive eruption like a volcano. This was different. This was a flood of lava that would eventually cover an area larger than Western Europe. An area so vast that if you stood at one edge, the other side would be beyond the horizon. And this wasn't a brief event. The eruptions lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe longer. Wave after wave of molten rock pouring out of the earth, releasing gases, ash, sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, into an atmosphere that had no way to process it fast enough. Think about that. Not one volcano, not a sudden disaster, but a slow, relentless poisoning. A planetary wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. The immediate effects were bad enough. The ash would have darkened the skies, blocking sunlight, cooling the planet in short, violent pulses. But the long-term effects were worse. Carbon dioxide began to accumulate. The greenhouse effect kicked in. Temperatures started to rise. Not quickly, not like flipping a switch, but steadily, relentlessly. Degree by degree, the planet warmed. And as it warmed, things began to break. Oceans absorb carbon dioxide. It's one of the ways Earth regulates its atmosphere, a slow, natural buffering system. But there's a limit. When you dissolve carbon dioxide into water, it forms carbonic acid. A weak acid, but an acid nonetheless. And as more and more CO2 flooded into the atmosphere and then into the oceans, the pH of the water began to drop. The oceans became more acidic, and anything that relied on calcium carbonate to build shells, skeletons, reefs, began to struggle. Coral-like organisms, shellfish, trilobites, their bodies started to dissolve, not overnight, but generation by generation they weakened, and then the oxygen began to disappear. This is the part that's hard to visualize, because we think of oxygen as just there, constant, invisible, reliable. You breathe in and it's there. You don't think about where it comes from or how fragile the systems are that produce it. But oxygen is a product. It's made by living things, photosynthetic organisms, plants on land, phytoplankton in the ocean. They take in carbon dioxide, use sunlight, and release oxygen. It's a cycle, a balance. But when the oceans warmed, that balance tipped. Warm water holds less oxygen than cold water. It's a simple physical fact. And as the oceans heated, the oxygen dissolved in the water began to escape into the atmosphere. At the same time, the creatures that produce oxygen, the phytoplankton, began to die. The warmer, more acidic water was hostile to them. They couldn't photosynthesize as efficiently. Their populations crashed, less oxygen being produced. Less oxygen dissolved in the water, and in the deep ocean, where currents normally circulate and refresh the water, the circulation slowed, stopped in some places. The deep became stagnant, anoxic. dead zones spread. And here's where it gets worse. When organic matter decays in water without oxygen, it doesn't just disappear, it ferments. It produces methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas far more potent than carbon dioxide. So now you have a feedback loop. Warming oceans release methane. Methane warms the planet further, which warms the oceans more, which releases more methane. A spiral, a cascade, a system collapsing into itself. On land, things weren't much better. As temperatures climbed, the massive forests that covered parts of Pangaea began to die. Trees are resilient, but there are limits. When the heat becomes too extreme, when droughts last too long, when the soil itself begins to change, forests collapse. And when forests collapse, they release the carbon they've been storing. More CO2 into the atmosphere, more warming, another feedback loop. The air itself became thinner, not in the sense that it lost pressure, but in the sense that the percentage of oxygen dropped. Some estimates suggest it fell to around 50%. Today we breathe air that's about 21% oxygen. A drop to 15% is enough to make breathing feel labored, enough to make physical exertion exhausting. Imagine trying to run, to hunt, to escape, in air that feels like you're standing on a mountain peak. Now imagine you're an animal that spent millions of years adapting to higher oxygen levels, and suddenly the atmosphere doesn't support you anymore. The die-off began in the oceans. The reefs collapsed first. The creatures that built them, the ancient equivalents of coral, simply stopped being able to grow. Their structures crumbled. The ecosystems that depended on them, the fish, the scavengers, the predators, all lost their foundation. Trilobites, those ancient armored survivors that had endured for 300 million years, went extinct. Not a single species survived. Creatures that had weathered ice ages, asteroid impacts, shifting continents, all of it met their end in warm, acidic water that couldn't support them. On land, the synapsids, the dominant animals of the Permian, were devastated. The large ones, the ones that needed vast amounts of food and oxygen to sustain their bulk, died first. Then the medium-sized ones, then the small ones. Entire lineages disappeared. The fossil record from this time shows something chilling, a sudden, dramatic thinning of diversity. Layers of rock filled with the remains of varied, complex life, followed by layers that are almost empty, just a few scattered survivors. The lucky ones, or maybe not lucky, maybe just the ones that happened to have the right combination of traits to endure a world that was no longer built for them. And it wasn't quick. That's the part we often miss. We think of mass extinctions as sudden, like a meteor strike or a volcanic explosion that wipes everything out in an instant. But the Great Dying unfolded over tens of thousands of years. The Great, maybe hundreds of thousands. It was a slow strangling, a suffocation that happened across generations. Animals didn't see the world end. They just lived in a world that kept getting harder to survive in, year after year, until one day their species simply didn't exist anymore. Pause for a moment, think about that. A catastrophe so slow that no single creature would have understood what was happening. Just a gradual dimming, a gradual thinning, until almost everything was gone. The Earth at the height of the extinction would have been unrecognizable. The oceans, once teeming with life, became graveyards. Dead zones spread across the seafloor. Blooms of sulfur-producing bacteria turned the water toxic, giving off hydrogen sulfide, a gas that smells like rotten eggs and is poisonous to most complex life. The skies would have been hazy, choked with ash and aerosols from the ongoing volcanic eruptions. The sun, when it broke through, would have cast a weak, diffused light over landscapes that had gone silent. No bird song, no buzz of insects. Just wind moving through the remains of forests. And yet, even in the worst of it, even when 90% of species had been erased, life didn't end. 5% of species survived. A sliver, a fragment, but enough. This is where the story shifts, because survival, in a world like that, required something more than luck. It required traits that weren't valuable before, traits that had been sitting quietly in the genetic background, waiting for a moment like this. Small body size, for instance. Animals that needed less food, less oxygen, could survive where large ones couldn't. Burrowing behavior, creatures that could escape the heat by going underground during the day, the ability to tolerate low oxygen. Some organisms had evolved in environments where oxygen was already scarce, swamps or deep burrows, and they happened to be pre-adapted for a world where the air had thinned. These survivors didn't rebuild the world immediately. The recovery took millions of years. For a long stretch after the extinction, Earth was dominated popular ice colors, scientists call them, chaos and thieves infested. Opportunistic creatures that could thrive in disturbed, hostile environments. Fungi, for instance, spread across the dead forests, feeding on the remains. Certain types of shellfish that could tolerate acidic water began to repopulate the oceans. But diversity, the rich tapestry of life that had existed before, took time to return. And when it did return, it was different. The creatures that emerged in the Triassic period, the age that followed the Permian, were not the same as the ones that came before. The synapsids, once dominant, were reduced to small, marginal populations. In their place, a new group began to rise, the arch-coursers, the ancestors of dinosaurs, crocodiles, birds. The great dying had cleared the stage, and a new cast of characters stepped into the roles. This is one of the strange ironies of mass extinctions. They destroy, yes, but they also create opportunity. Ecological niches that were once filled get emptied, and in the scramble to refill them, evolution experiments, tries new forms, new strategies. The world that emerged from the Permian Triassic extinction was one that would eventually give rise to the age of dinosaurs, and later to mammals, and eventually to us. But let's not move forward too quickly. Let's sit with the event itself a little longer, because there's something deeply unsettling about the great dying that goes beyond the numbers, beyond the science. It's the reminder that Earth is not a stable, safe place. It's a dynamic, volatile system that can shift in ways that erase almost everything. And it doesn't require an asteroid. It doesn't require an external threat. The planet can do this to itself. Think about the mechanisms that nearly ended life. Volcanic eruptions, climate change, ocean acidification, oxygen depletion, feedback loops. None of these are foreign concepts to us today. We talk about them now. We measure them. We watch them happen in real time. And while the scale is different, the processes are the same. The Earth is capable of entering states where the conditions that support complex life begin to unravel. It's happened before. It could happen again. But here's the thing. The great dying wasn't inevitable. It was the result of a specific combination of factors that aligned in a particularly catastrophic way. The eruptions in Siberia were unusually large and unusually prolonged. The supercontinent configuration of Pangaea may have amplified the effects, limiting ocean circulation, creating extreme interior climates. The timing, the intensity, the duration, all of it mattered. Change one variable, and maybe the extinction is less severe. Maybe more species survive. Maybe the recovery is faster. Or maybe it's worse. Maybe there are scenarios where life doesn't recover at all, where the feedback loops spiral so far out of control that the planet tips into a permanent hothouse state or a permanent icehouse, and the thin film of biology that clings to the surface is wiped away entirely. We don't know where those thresholds are. We don't know how close Earth came during the Great Dying to crossing a line from which there was no return. And that uncertainty is what haunts the scientists who study this event. Because the Earth is not done changing. It's still active, still shifting, still capable of surprises. And we, as a species, have become an active participant in those changes. We pump carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We alter ocean chemistry. We shift ecosystems. We don't mean to recreate the conditions of the Permian Triassic extinction, but the levers we're pulling are the same ones that were pulled 252 million years ago. Let's zoom out for a moment. Step back from the specific details of the Great Dying and look at the bigger picture. Earth has experienced 5 major mass extinctions in its history. The Permian Triassic was the worst, but it wasn't the only one. Each time, life came close to the edge, and each time, it pulled back. It survived, it recovered, it diversified again. But here's what's strange. The time between these events is vast, tens of millions of years, hundreds of millions. And in that time, life doesn't just sit still. It explores, it fills niches, it becomes complex. And then something happens. A volcanic episode, a climate shift, an asteroid impact, and the complexity collapses. The survivors are often simpler, smaller, more generalized. And the process of rebuilding complexity takes millions of years. So, in a sense, the history of life on Earth is a history of cycles. Building up, breaking down, building up again. And each time the building happens, it happens differently. Different forms, different strategies, different outcomes. The dinosaurs didn't exist before the Permian Triassic extinction. They couldn't have. The ecological space wasn't there. The dominance of the synapsids prevented it. But once that dominance was broken, the door opened. And through that door came creatures that would define an entire era. We like to think of evolution as progress, as a ladder, climbing towards something better, something more advanced. But the fossil record doesn't support that. Evolution is more like a branching tree, constantly splitting, constantly exploring different possibilities. And mass extinctions and the moments when huge sections of that tree get cut away. What grows back is not necessarily better, just different, adapted to the new conditions. And here's the uncomfortable truth. We are a product of one of those moments. The extinction that killed the dinosaurs 66 million years ago cleared the way for mammals to diversify. Without that asteroid impact, without the collapse of the dinosaur-dominated ecosystems, mammals might have remained small, marginal, nocturnal. Primates might never have evolved. Humans might never have existed. We owe our existence, in a very real sense, to catastrophe. But that doesn't make catastrophe good. It just makes it neutral. A force of nature, something that happens. And in the context of the Great Dying, that neutrality is chilling, because it means the Earth doesn't care. It doesn't have a stake in whether life survives or not. It will continue spinning, continue orbiting the sun, continue existing as a planet, regardless of whether its surface is covered in forests and oceans and animals, or whether it's a barren wasteland. Life is not the default state of a planet. It's a temporary condition, a delicate balance of chemistry and energy and time, and that balance can be disrupted. The survivors of the Permian Triassic extinction didn't know they were survivors. They didn't know they were living through the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. They just lived, day by day, generation by generation, in a world that had become hostile and strange. They endured because they had no choice. And eventually, very slowly, the world began to heal. The volcanic eruptions in Siberia eventually stopped. The flood basalts solidified into vast plateaus of rock that still exist today. The carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, over hundreds of thousands of years, was gradually absorbed by weathering rocks, by the slow growth of new plant life, by the chemistry of the oceans recovering. The temperatures began to stabilize. The oxygen levels began to rise. The dead zones in the ocean began to shrink as circulation resumed. But the world that emerged was not the world that had been lost. The trilobites were gone forever. The great reefs of the Permian would not return for millions of years, and when they did, they were built by different organisms. The forests that regrow were made of different trees. The animals that roamed them were new lineages, new experiments in form and function. And in the oceans, in the murky, recovering waters, something remarkable happened. Small, unassuming creatures began to diversify. Ammonites, distant relatives of modern squid and octopuses, exploded into hundreds of new species. Fish, which had survived the extinction better than most marine life, began to explore new forms. And in the shallows, new reefs began to grow, this time built by corals, the ancestors of the reefs we know today. On land, the story was slower. For millions of years after the extinction, ecosystems remained simple, low diversity, a few dominant species. But gradually, very gradually, new forms emerged. The first true dinosaurs appeared in the Triassic, small and unremarkable at first. The first mammals, tiny shrew-like creatures, scurried through the underbrush. The first true crocodiles took to the rivers. The world was being reborn. But the memory of the Great Dying, if such a thing can be said to exist in the geological record, lingered. The rocks from that time, the layers of sediment laid down during and after the extinction, tell a story of a world in crisis. Fossils are rare. The ones that do exist often show signs of stress, deformities, reduced size, evidence of malnutrition or disease. The Earth, for a long time, was not a healthy place. And yet, life persisted. Because that's what life does. It persists. It adapts. It finds a way. Not because it's trying to. Not because it has a goal. But because the ones that can't adapt, the ones that can't persist, disappear. And the ones that remain, by definition, are the ones that could. Think about that for a moment. Every living thing on Earth today, every part, every animal, every microbe, is a descendant of the survivors. Not just of the Permian Triassic extinction, but of all the extinctions that came before and after. Every one of us, every creature, carries in our DNA the legacy of those moments of near-total collapse. We are the product of the worst days Earth has ever seen, and that should make us humble, because we are not separate from these processes. We are not immune. We are as vulnerable as the trilobites, as the reefs, as the forests of the Permian. We live in a thin, fragile layer of habitability on a planet that is capable of becoming uninhabitable. And the things that can trigger that transformation, volcanic eruptions, climate change, shifts in ocean chemistry, are still here, still active, still possible. But here's the strange thing. Despite all of this, despite the evidence that the Earth can turn hostile, that life can be pushed to the brink, we still exist. We're still here. And more than that, we're aware. We can study the past. We can learn from it. We can see the patterns. We can understand, at least partially, what went wrong 252 million years ago. And that understanding gives us something that no other species has ever had: the ability to anticipate, to prepare, to maybe, just maybe, avoid repeating the same mistakes. But it also gives us a responsibility, because we're not passive observers anymore. We're active participants. We shape the planet now. We alter the atmosphere, the oceans, the land. And the question is whether we'll use that power wisely, or whether we'll trigger our own great dying. A sixth mass extinction, one of our own making. Some scientists believe we're already in the early stages of one. The rate of species lost today is far higher than the background rate, the normal pace at which species go extinct. Habitats are being destroyed. Climate is changing faster than many organisms can adapt. Coral reefs, those modern descendants of the Permian reefs, are bleaching and dying. Ocean acidification is rising again, this time driven by human emissions of carbon dioxide. The parallels are uncomfortable, but there are differences too. The great dying unfolded over hundreds of thousands of years. We've been industrializing for barely 300. The timescales are different. The mechanisms are different. The outcomes might be different. We don't know yet. We're living in the middle of the experiment, and that's the terrifying part. We don't get to see the end. We don't get to know how this chapter of Earth's history will be written. We can only make choices now, in this moment, and hope that they steer us away from the cliff edge. But let's not end on fear. Let's end on something else. Wonder, maybe, or perspective. Because the great dying, as terrible as it was, also shows us something profound. It shows us that life is resilient, not invincible, not immune to harm, but resilient, capable of enduring unimaginable stress and still finding a way forward. The Earth, after the worst extinction in its history, didn't stay dead. It healed, slowly, painfully, but it healed. And a life that emerged was not diminished, not in the long run. It was different, new, full of potential. And maybe that's the real lesson. Not that catastrophes are inevitable, or that we should accept them, but that even in the darkest moments, even when 90% of life is gone, the remaining 10% is enough. Enough to rebuild. Enough to create something new. We are part of that story now. We didn't choose to be, we were born into it. But we're here, and the choices we make, the way we treat this fragile, resilient planet, will echo forward in ways we can't fully predict. Maybe our chapter will be one of recovery, of learning, of steering away from the edge. Or maybe it will be another layer of rock, another boundary in the fossil record, marking a time when things went wrong. Either way, the Earth will continue. It always has. It endured the great dying. It endured the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. It endured ice ages and volcanoes. But the question isn't whether the Earth will survive. The question is whether we will. Whether the things we value, the ecosystems, the diversity, the beauty of a living world, will persist. Or whether future geologists, if any exist, will look back at our time and see another thin layer, another moment when the planet became uninhabitable for almost everything. Think about that, not as a warning, not as a call to action, just as a fact, a possibility, a reminder that we live on a planet that is capable of extraordinary violence and extraordinary renewal, often within the same breath. The Great Dying happened 252 million years ago, and yet, in the deep time of geology, it's recent. A blink, a moment, and the processes that drove it, the warming, the acidification, the oxygen depletion, are not ancient history. They're present, active, happening now, in different forms, at different scales. And so we stand here, on this spinning rock, looking back at the worst day Earth has ever had, and forward into a future we can't fully see. And all we can do is learn, adapt, persist, just like the survivors of the Permian Triassic extinction. Just like every living thing that came before us. Because, in the end, that's what life does. It survives. Not because it's strong, not because it's destined to, but because in every catastrophe, there are always a few who find a way. A few who endure. A few who carry the story forward into the next age, whatever that age might hold. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be among them. Pause. Think about that. The Earth, 252 million years ago, nearly became a dead world, a silent, empty planet orbiting a star in the endless dark. But it didn't. Life held on, by a thread, by a whisper. And from that whisper came forests and oceans and animals, and eventually, us, beings capable of looking back at that moment and understanding what it meant, capable of feeling awe and fear and responsibility all at once. That's not a small thing. That's not insignificant. That's the inheritance of the Great Dying. Not just survival, but awareness. The ability to know that we came close to not existing at all. And the responsibility to make sure that the story continues, not just for us, but for all the other threads of life that share this planet with us. The oceans are still here. The forests are still growing. The air is still breathable. For now. And that for now is both a comfort and a challenge, because it reminds us that nothing is permanent. Nothing is guaranteed. The Earth is not a stable platform. It's a living, shifting, unpredictable system. And we are part of it, whether we like it or not. But we're also something new, something that no previous extinction had to contend with. We're aware. We're technological. We can measure the carbon in the atmosphere down to the part per million. We can model climate systems. We can predict, to some degree, what will happen if we keep doing what we're doing. And that gives us a choice. A real, tangible choice. We can change course. Or we can keep going. The survivors of the Permian Triassic extinction didn't have that choice. They were passengers on a planet that had gone out of control. They endured because they happened to have the right traits at the right time. But we're different. We can see the trajectory. We can alter it. The question is whether we will. And that's where the story becomes uncomfortable, because it's no longer about the past. It's about now. about us, about the decisions we make every day, individually and collectively. And those decisions, as small as they might seem, add up. They accumulate. They shape the trajectory of the planet. But let's not pretend we have all the answers. We don't. The Earth is complex in ways we're still trying to understand. Climate models, as sophisticated as they are, still have uncertainties. Feedback loops that we know exist but can't fully predict. Tipping points that might be closer or farther than we think. We're flying somewhat blind, trying to navigate a system that is vastly larger and more complicated than any one mind or even any one generation can fully grasp. And maybe that's okay. Maybe uncertainty is part of the human condition. We've always lived with it. We've always had to make decisions with incomplete information, trusting that we're doing the best we can with what we know. The survivors of the Great Dying didn't understand what was happening to their world, but they adapted anyway. They survived anyway. And maybe we can do the same. But here's the difference. They didn't have a choice about whether the catastrophe happened. We do. Or at least we have some influence. We can't stop volcanic eruptions. We can't prevent asteroid impacts. But we can stop pumping carbon into the atmosphere. We can protect ecosystems. We can choose to value the long-term health of the planet over short-term gain. And that choice, as difficult as it is, as complicated as it is what separates us from every other species that has ever existed. We are the first to be able to look back at the Great Dying and understand it. The first to be able to say, this happened and it merely ended everything, and we need to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's not a burden to take lightly, but it's also not a reason for despair, because awareness is the first step toward change. And we are, for the first time in Earth's history, aware. The rocks remember. The layers of sediment from the Permian Triassic boundary hold the story of what happened. Fossils that appear and then vanish. Chemical signatures of a world in turmoil. Ash layers from the Siberian eruptions. Evidence of ocean acidification. Markers of a time when the planet teetered on the edge. And those rocks are a record, not just of what was lost, but of what endured. Of the small, stubborn fragments of life that refused to disappear entirely. And from those fragments, everything that followed. The dinosaurs, the mammals, the birds, the flowers, the forests. Us, all of it, traces back to that moment, to the few who survived, to the resilience of life in the face of unimaginable adversity. So when we look at the Great Dying, we're not just looking at a catastrophe, we're looking at a testament to endurance, to adaptation, to the strange, improbable persistence of biology on a planet that is not always hospitable. And that should give us hope, not blind optimism, not the assumption that everything will be fine, but hope rooted in the knowledge that life has faced worse and survived, and that we, as part of that lineage, carry that same capacity for survival. But survival alone is not enough. We don't just want to survive. We want to thrive. We want the world to be rich and diverse and beautiful. We want forests and oceans and coral reefs. We want the hum of insects and the songs of birds and the slow, quiet growth of ancient trees. We want the world to be alive, not just technically habitable, but truly, vibrantly alive. And that's what's at stake. not just whether humans will make it through the next few centuries, but whether the world we leave behind is one worth living in. Whether it's a world where other species can thrive too, where ecosystems can function, where the cycles that have sustained life for billions of years can continue uninterrupted. The Great Dying was a rupture in those cycles, a violent, catastrophic break. But the cycles resumed, slowly, painfully, but they resumed, and the world healed. And maybe that's the most important lesson. Not that catastrophes are survivable, though they are, but that healing is possible, that even after the worst, there is a path forward. It's not easy, it's not quick, but it exists, and we have the opportunity right now to choose that path. To avoid the catastrophe in the first place, or if we can't avoid it entirely, to minimize the damage, to give the Earth and ourselves the best possible chance. That's not a guarantee. There are no guarantees. The future is uncertain. It always has been. But uncertainty is not the same as hopelessness. It's a space where choices matter, where actions have consequences, where the decisions we make today ripple outward into a future we can't fully see, but can still shape. The Earth is not fragile. It's survived far worse than anything we can throw at it. But the world we know, the world we love, the world of living forests and clear oceans and breathable air is fragile. It exists in a delicate balance, and that balance can be disrupted. Not easily, not quickly, but it can be. And once disrupted, the path back is long. Millions of years in the case of the Great Dying. We don't have millions of years. We have decades, maybe a century or two, if we're lucky. And in that time, we have to decide what kind of planet we want to leave behind, what kind of legacy we want to be. Do we want to be the species that learned from the past and changed course? Or the species that saw the warning signs and ignored them? The survivors who adapted, or the ones who didn't? Those are the questions that haunt the study of mass extinctions, because they're not just about the past, they're about the present, about us, about the world we're creating, consciously or not, with every choice we make. And so we return, one last time, to the Great Dying. To that moment 252 million years ago, when the Earth became nearly uninhabitable. When the air thinned and the oceans acidified and the forests died and 90% of species vanished into the fossil record. And we remember that it happened, that it was real, that the Earth is capable of extraordinary violence against the life it hosts. But we also remember that life came back, that the 10% who survived were enough, that from the ashes of the Permian, a new world emerged, not the same, but new, full of possibility, and we carry that knowledge with us, that resilience, that stubbornness, that refusal to disappear entirely, because we are, all of us, the descendants of survivors, of creatures that endured the unendurable and lived to pass their genes, their traits, their strategies forward into the future. We are the future they created, and the future we create will be someone else's past, someone or something looking back at our time and wondering what we did, what choices we made, whether we rose to the challenge or faltered. And we won't know the answer, not in our lifetimes, But we can make the attempt, we can try, we can choose to be the ones who learned, who adapted, who cared enough to change course. That's not certainty, but it's something. It's a chance. And in the long, turbulent history of life on Earth, a chance is all any species has ever had. The Great Dying reminds us that the Earth is not a safe place. It's a dynamic, volatile, beautiful, terrifying planet, and we are privileged to live here, to breathe its air, to walk its surface, to be part of the great, ongoing experiment of life. But privilege comes with responsibility, the responsibility to protect, to preserve, to pass forward, not just to our own children, but to all the other species that share this world with us. A planet that is still habitable, still alive, still full of wonder. And maybe, in the end, that's enough. Not a grand conclusion, not a final answer, just a quiet commitment to keep trying, to keep learning, to keep adapting, to be, in our own way, survivors, just like the ones who came before. Just like the ones who endured the Great Dying and lived to see the dawn of a new age. We are their legacy. And the question now is what legacy we will leave. Think about that. Not with fear, not with guilt, but with awareness, with humility, with the understanding that we are small, fragile, temporary beings on a planet that will outlast us by billions of years, but also with the knowledge that while we're here, while we exist, we have the power to shape the trajectory, to influence the outcome, to make choices that matter. And in that power, that responsibility, that awareness, lies something profound, something that no other species in all of Earth's long history has ever possessed. The ability to look back at the worst day the planet has ever had and say, we understand, we remember, and we will do better. That's not a promise. Promises are easy to break, but it's an intention, a direction, a choice to move towards something better rather than away from it. And maybe that's all we can do. Choose. Act, adapt, persist, just like life has always done, just like life will always do, as long as there's a chance, as long as there's a sliver of possibility. As long as the Earth, in all its turbulence and beauty, remains a place where life can exist. And it does. For now, it does. The oceans still breathe, the forests still grow, the air still carries oxygen, the planet still spins, and we are still here, still watching, still wondering, still trying to understand. And that, in itself, is a kind of miracle, a continuation of a story that almost ended 252 million years ago, but didn't, and hasn't yet, and maybe won't. As long as we remember, as long as we learn, as long as we choose to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. The Great Dying is over, the world recovered, life went on, and it can again, if we let it. But there's something we haven't talked about yet, something that sits beneath all of this, a question that emerges when you stare long enough at the numbers, at the timescales, at the sheer scale of what happened during the Great Dying. Why did anything survive at all? It's easy to say 5% made it through and move on, but think about what that actually means. Think about the conditions. Air too thin to breathe easily, oceans turned acidic and oxygen-starved. Temperatures soaring beyond what most organisms could tolerate. Massive die-offs, eliminating the food chains that everything depended on. Entire ecosystems collapsing like dominoes. In that world, In those conditions, survival wasn't just difficult. It should have been impossible, and yet it wasn't. Somehow, scattered across the planet, in isolated pockets, in marginal environments, in places where conditions were just slightly less catastrophic, life held on, not thriving, barely existing, but existing nonetheless. And here's what's strange. We don't entirely understand how. We can point to traits that helped. Small size, low metabolic needs, the ability to burrow or hibernate or slow down life processes to almost nothing. But those are descriptions, not explanations. They tell us what survived, not why those specific lineages, in those specific places, managed to endure when everything around them died. There's an element of randomness to it. Chance. A group of creatures happens to be living near a freshwater spring that stays cool even as the world heats up. A population gets isolated in a high-altitude region, where the air, though thin, retains slightly more oxygen than the lowlands. A species that had evolved in an already harsh environment, already pushed to the edge of what's survivable, finds that the new conditions, as terrible as they are within its range of tolerance. Luck, in other words, not skill, not superiority. Just being in the right place, with the right traits, at the right time. And that should humble us, because it means survival, even in the long run, is not guaranteed. It fails to stay accepted as fine. If inflection, sometimes it just comes down to chance, to variables you can't control, to forces larger than any individual, any species, any ecosystem. The trilobites were survivors. For 300 million years they had endured. They had weathered mass extinctions before. They had adapted to changing seas, shifting climates, new predators. They were successful by any measure. And yet, during the Great Dying, every single species went extinct. Not because they were weak, not because they failed to adapt, but because the world changed in a way that left no room for them, no niche, no refuge, nowhere to hide. And that's the terrifying randomness of extinction. It doesn't matter how long you've survived. It doesn't matter how well adapted you are. If the world shifts in a certain way, if the conditions change beyond a certain threshold, you're gone. Erased. A memory preserved only in stone. We like to think we're different. We like to think our intelligence, our technology, our ability to manipulate the environment gives us an edge. And maybe it does. Maybe we can engineer our way out of problems that would doom other species. Maybe we can build shelters, synthesize food, create closed-loop life support systems if the planet becomes too hostile. But maybe we can't. Maybe there are thresholds that, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Tipping points beyond which no amount of technology can save us. We don't know. We've never been tested like this before. And the Great Dying suggests that confidence, even justified confidence, is not the same as invulnerability. The creatures that survived the Permian Triassic extinction didn't know they were survivors until it was over. They didn't plan for it. They didn't prepare. They just endured, day by day, in a world that had become hostile, until one day, imperceptibly, things started to improve. The air became breathable again, the oceans cooled, the food came back, and life, slowly, began to spread once more. But that recovery was not a return to the old world. It couldn't be. Too much had been lost, too many lineages erased, too many ecosystems dismantled. The world that emerged was built on the ruins of what came before, and it was fundamentally different. The Triassic period, the age that followed the Great Dying, was a strange time. For millions of years, biodiversity remained low. A handful of species dominated vast regions. Lystrosaurus, a pig-sized herbivore, became so common that its fossils make up the majority of vertebrate remains from the early Triassic. It wasn't because Lystrosaurus was superior. It was just one of the few things left, and in the absence of competition, it spread. This is what ecologists call a disaster fauna. Species that thrive not because they're well adapted to a healthy ecosystem, but because they're well adapted to a broken one. They're opportunists, generalists, capable of surviving on poor quality food, in degraded environments, without the complex interactions that characterize diverse ecosystems. And for a long time, that's what Earth was. A planet the terrible and precious floating state is met. But because the conditions didn't allow it, the climate was still unstable, the oceans were still recovering, the soils were still depleted. The world was in a state of shock, and it took time for that shock to wear off. Think about that time frame. Millions of years, not human lifetimes, not generations, not even the span of recorded history. Millions of years of a planet struggling to recover from wounds so deep that the scars are still visible in the rock record today. And yet, eventually, it did recover. New species emerged, ecosystems became more complex. The archosaurs diversified, giving rise to dinosaurs, pterosaurs, crocodilians. The first true mammals appeared, small and nocturnal, hiding in the shadows. The oceans filled with new forms of life. Ammonites spiraled through the water. Ichthyosaurs, the dolphin-like reptiles, became apex predators. Coral reefs began to grow again, building structures that would rival anything the Permian had produced. The world healed, but it took time, an almost incomprehensible amount of time. And it didn't heal into the same world. It healed into something new. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Not that catastrophes are survivable, though they are. Not that life is resilient, though it is. But that when something breaks on this scale, it doesn't go back to the way it was. It goes forward into something different. And whether that something is better or worse depends entirely on your perspective. For the trilobites, the post-Permian world was worse. It didn't exist for them at all. For the archosaurs, it was better. They inherited a planet with open niches, empty spaces waiting to be filled. For the synapsids, the proto-mammals, it was a mixed bag. They survived, but they lost their dominance. They would remain marginal for the next 150 million years, small creatures scurrying in the underbrush while the dinosaurs ruled. We don't get to choose which category we fall into. We don't get to decide whether the world that emerges from our current trajectory is one that includes us or not. We can influence the odds. We can make choices that steer us toward better outcomes, but we can't guarantee anything. And that uncertainty, that fundamental not knowing, is part of what makes studying mass extinctions so unsettling, because they reveal something about the nature of existence that we'd rather not think about, that we are not in control, that the planet is not a stable stage on which we perform. It's a dynamic, unpredictable system, and we are just one part of it. A temporary part, and part is no mass extinction.
The rocks don't care whether we're here or not. The continents will continue to drift. The volcanoes will continue to erupt. The climate will continue to shift, with or without us. And if we disappear, if we become another fossil layer marking another extinction event, the planet will recover. Not quickly, but it will recover. And something else will take our place. That's not a reason to give up. It's not a reason to throw our hands in the air and say nothing matters. If anything, it's the opposite. It's a reason to recognize how precious this moment is, how temporary, how unlikely. Because we are here, right now. Against all odds.
The descendants of survivors who made it through the Great Dying, who made it through 4 other mass extinctions, who made it through ice ages and volcanic winters and asteroid impacts. We are the product of an unbroken chain of survival stretching back billions of years. And that chain could break at any time for any number of reasons. But it hasn't yet. And that's worth something. That's worth protecting. The scientists who study the Permian Triassic extinction are not just looking backward. They're looking for patterns, warning signs, indicators that might tell us when a system is approaching a tipping point. And what they found is both reassuring and terrifying. Reassuring, because Earth has mechanisms for self-correction. The carbon cycle, over geological time, is self-regulating. Volcanic eruptions release carbon dioxide, but weathering of rocks absorbs it. Oceans acidify, but eventually the buffering capacity returns. Temperatures rise, but feedback mechanisms kick in to bring them back down. The planet has survived catastrophes before, and it will survive them again. But terrifying, because those mechanisms work on timescales that are meaningless to us. Hundreds of thousands of years, millions of years. Time enough for the planet to heal, but not time enough for any individual, any civilization, any species to survive the transition. And that's the gap we're living in, the gap between geological time and human time, between the slow, patient processes of planetary recovery and the fast, fragile existence of complex life. We can't wait millions of years for the Earth to balance itself. We need it to be habitable now, and for the foreseeable future. And that means we have to work within the constraints of a system that is vastly larger, vastly older, and vastly more powerful than we are. But we can work within those constraints. We can understand the mechanisms. We can measure the changes. We can model the outcomes. And we can choose, to the extent that we have agency, to push the system towards stability rather than chaos. That's not hubris. That's not claiming we control the planet. It's recognizing that we influence it, whether we intend to or not. And that influence comes with responsibility. The Great Dying was not caused by humans. Obviously, we didn't exist yet. It was caused by volcanic eruptions on a scale we can barely imagine, amplified by feedback loops that turned a regional catastrophe into a global one. But the mechanisms, the processes, the chemistry are the same ones we're dealing with today. Carbon dioxide accumulation, ocean acidification, temperature rise, oxygen depletion. We are running the same experiment the Siberian traps ran 252 million years ago, just faster, much faster, and with full awareness of what we're doing. And that's the difference. The Earth doesn't know it's changing. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't make decisions. It just responds to physical laws. Energy in, energy out, carbon released, carbon absorbed, heat accumulated, heat radiated. It's a system, a complex, chaotic, beautifully intricate system, but a system nonetheless. We, on the other hand, do know. We can see what's happening. We can measure it. We can predict with reasonable accuracy what will happen if we continue on our current path. And that knowledge is both a gift and a burden. A gift because it gives us the opportunity to change course, to make different choices, to avoid the worst outcomes, but a burden because it means we can't claim ignorance. We can't say we didn't know. Future generations, if they exist, will look back at this moment and judge us not by our intentions, but by our actions. And that's a heavy weight to carry, especially when the problems feel so large, so overwhelming, so far beyond the control of any individual. What can one person do in the face of global climate change, in the face of ocean acidification, in the face of mass extinction? The honest answer is not much. Not alone, but collectively, cumulatively. The choices we make add up. They compound. They steer the trajectory, even if only slightly. And sometimes, a slight change in trajectory, applied early enough, is enough to avoid the cliff. But we're running out of time for small changes. The window for gentle course corrections is closing. What's needed now are larger shifts. Systemic changes. A recognition that the way we've been living, the way we've been extracting and burning and emitting is not sustainable. Not over the long term, not even over the medium term. And that's where the great dying becomes more than just a historical curiosity. It becomes a warning. A reminder that the Earth is capable of entering states that are hostile to complex life. And once it enters those states, the path back is long and brutal. Better to avoid the cliff than to survive the fall. But how do we avoid it? That's the question that doesn't have a simple answer. Because the systems we've built, the economies, the infrastructures, the ways of life, are all predicated on assumptions that no longer hold. Infinite growth on a finite planet, unlimited extraction from limited resources, the ability to dump waste into the atmosphere and oceans without consequence. Those assumptions were always false, but for a long time, the consequences were invisible, delayed, diffused across space and time. But now, they're becoming visible. The climate is changing, the oceans are warming and acidifying. Species are disappearing at rates that rival the great extinctions of the past. The bill is coming due, and we have to decide how to pay it. Whether to pay it now, with changes that are difficult but manageable, or to defer it, passing the cost to future generations who will have even fewer options. That's not a scientific question. That's a moral one. A question of values. Of what we owe to those who come after us, of whether we see ourselves as part of a continuum, a chain of generations, stretching backward and forward through time, or as isolated individuals living in an eternal present. The survivors of the Great Dying didn't have that choice. They didn't choose to endure. They just did, or they didn't. But we have the capacity to choose, to look ahead, to anticipate, to change course before the worst happens. And that capacity, that foresight, is what makes us unique in the history of life on Earth. No other species has ever had it. No other species has ever been able to see a catastrophe coming and have the power to prevent it. But power without wisdom is dangerous. And wisdom without action is useless. We need both. We need to understand the systems we're part of, and we need to act on that understanding. Not perfectly. We won't get everything right, but thoughtfully, intentionally, with the long-term health of the planet and all its inhabitants in mind. The Great Dying ended 252 million years ago. But its lessons are still relevant, still urgent, still echoing through deep time into the present moment. And the question is, whether we'll listen, whether we'll learn, whether we'll be the species that saw the warning signs and changed course, or the species that ignored them and paid the price. We don't know yet. The story is still being written, and we are the ones writing it with every choice we make every day. That's both terrifying and empowering. Terrifying because it means the outcome is not predetermined. Empowering because it means we still have agency. We still have influence. We still have time, however limited, to make a difference. And maybe that's enough. Not certainty, not guarantees, just the possibility that our actions matter. That the future is not fixed. That we can, if we choose, steer towards something better. The Earth will survive regardless. It survived the Great Dying. It will survive us. But the question is, what kind of Earth it will be? A living, thriving, diverse world? Or a simplified, degraded shadow of what it could have been? That's up to us. And the clock is ticking, not in human time, not in political cycles or quarterly reports, but in geological time, which moves slowly until it doesn't, until a threshold is crossed, until feedback loops kick in, until the system tips into a new state, and then everything changes. Fast, irreversibly, just like it did 252 million years ago. We have the opportunity to prevent that, to stay on the stable side of the threshold, to maintain the conditions that make complex life possible. But we have to take it. We have to choose it, actively, deliberately, together, because no one person, no one country, no one generation can do this alone. It requires coordination on a scale humanity has never achieved before. But then again, we've never faced a challenge like this before. We've never had to think in terms of planetary systems, geological timescales. The survival of ecosystems that span the globe. But maybe we're capable of it. Maybe this is the moment we grow up as a species, the moment we stop thinking of ourselves as separate from nature and recognize that we are part of it, subject to the same forces, vulnerable to the same catastrophes, dependent on the same delicate balances. Or maybe we're not. Maybe we'll fail. Maybe future paleontologists, if any exist, will look back at our time and see another boundary layer, another spike in extinction rates, another moment when the planet became uninhabitable for almost everything. We don't know. We can't know. Not yet. But we can try. We can make the attempt. We can choose to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And in that choice, in that simple act of trying, we honor the legacy of those who survived the Great Dying, those stubborn, persistent fragments of life that refused to disappear, that endured the unendurable and passed their genes forward into an uncertain future. We are that future. We are what they became, and what we become will be someone else's past, someone else's legacy.
Someone else's memory of someone else's memory of a time when the earth stood at a crossroads and the inhabitants chose which path to take. Let's choose wisely, not out of fear. Love for this strange, beautiful, fragile world we call home. Love for the forests and oceans and mountains. Love for the creatures we share the planet with. Love for the generations yet to come. Because in the end, that's what this is about. Not survival for survival's sake, but the preservation of something worth surviving for. A world that is not just habitable, but alive, vibrant, full of wonder and complexity and beauty.
That world still exists, for now, and it's worth fighting for. The great dying reminds us what's at stake, how much can be lost, how quickly things can unravel. But it also reminds us that recovery is possible, that life is resilient, that even in the darkest moments, hope remains. And maybe that's the final lesson. Not that we should be afraid, but that we should be awake, aware, present, engaged with the world around us and the systems that sustain it. Because we are alive in an extraordinary time, a time when one species has the power to shape the future of an entire planet, for better or worse. And that power comes with responsibility, the responsibility to think beyond ourselves, beyond our lifetimes, beyond our immediate needs. To think in terms of deep time, geological time, the long arc of history that stretches back billions of years and forward into an unknown future. We are a part of that arc, a small part, a temporary part, but a part nonetheless. And the mark we leave, the legacy we create, will echo forward long after we're gone. Let it be a legacy of wisdom, of care, of choosing life over extinction, of choosing complexity over simplification, of choosing a future where the Earth remains a living world, not just for us, but for all the other threads of existence that share this cosmic home. That's not too much to ask. That's not impossible. It's difficult, yes. It requires change, sacrifice, coordination, but it's within our reach. We just have to choose it and keep choosing it. Day after day, generation after generation, until the crisis has passed, until the systems have stabilized. Until the Earth, once again, is firmly on the path of recovery rather than collapse. And if we do that, if we make that choice, then maybe, millions of years from now, some future intelligence will look back at our time and see not a boundary layer, not a mass extinction, but a turning point. A moment when a species recognized the danger and changed course, when awareness led to action, when knowledge led to wisdom. And they'll see, in the fossil record, the continuation of diversity, the persistence of complexity, the survival of beauty. And they'll know that we chose well, that we were, in our own way, survivors. Just like the ones who endured the great dying, just like the ones who carried life forward through the darkness into the light. That's the story we can write, if we choose. The ending isn't written yet, but we hold the pen, and the page is waiting. There's a moment late in the research when scientists studying the Permian Triassic extinction come across something they don't expect. Something that doesn't fit the narrative of collapse and death. They find evidence of life trying, not just surviving. Trying, in rock layers from the early Triassic, just after the main pulse of the extinction, there are these strange formations. Stromatolites, ancient primitive structures built by colonies of microbes. They're not rare in Earth's deep past. In fact, they dominated the planet for billions of years before complex life evolved. But by the Permian, they had become uncommon, pushed to the margins by more advanced organisms, corals, sponges, creatures that could build reefs faster, more efficiently. But after the Great Dying, the stromatolites came back. Not everywhere, but in certain coastal environments. Certain shallow seas where the water was too harsh for anything else. these ancient microbes started building again, slowly, patiently, layer by layer. It's not a triumphant return. It's not a story of evolution moving forward. If anything, it's a regression, a return to a simpler, more primitive state. The planet, temporarily, resembled what it had looked like billions of years earlier, before the Cambrian explosion, before the diversification of complex life. And there's something deeply melancholic about that, the idea that the Earth, wounded so badly, reverted to an earlier chapter. That, for a time, the most complex ecosystems on the planet were built by microbes, the same way they had been in the deep Precambrian, before animals, before plants, before anything we would recognize as life. But here's what that tells us. Even when 90% of species are gone, even when the systems that supported complex life have collapsed, life doesn't stop. It reverts, it simplifies, it goes back to basics, and from those basics, slowly, it starts building again. The stromatolites didn't last forever. As conditions improved, as oxygen levels rose, as the oceans recovered, more complex organisms began to return, and the stromatolites once again were pushed to the margins. Back to the extreme environments where they still exist today. Hypersaline lakes, hot springs, places where almost nothing else can survive. But for a moment, for a geological eye blink of a few million years, they were the architects of Earth's ecosystems. And that moment is preserved in stone, a record of a planet trying to heal itself with the oldest tools it had. We tend to think of evolution as progress, as a march toward greater complexity, greater intelligence, greater capability. But the fossil record tells a different story. Evolution is not a ladder, it's a sprawling, branching network of experiments. Some become more complex, some become simpler, some persist for hundreds of millions of years, some vanish after a few thousand, and during mass extinctions, complexity is often a liability. The creatures with specialized diets, specialized habitats, specialized behaviors, they're the first to go. Because when the world changes, specialists can't adapt fast enough. They need specific conditions, specific food sources, specific temperatures, and when those conditions disappear, they disappear with them. The generalists, the opportunists, the ones that can eat almost anything, live almost anywhere, tolerate almost any condition, they're the ones that survive. Not because they're better, just because they're more flexible. And that flexibility comes with a cost. Generalists are usually not as efficient as specialists, not as well adapted to any particular environment. They're jacks of all trades, masters of none. But in a world that's rapidly changing, in a world where the old rules no longer apply, being a jack of all trades is enough. And so, in the aftermath of the Great Dying, the survivors were mostly generalists, small, hardy, flexible creatures that could make do with whatever resources were available. And from that reduced stock, the slow work of rebuilding began. It's tempting to see this as a setback, a loss, and in many ways it was. The biodiversity of the late Permian, the sheer variety of forms and strategies and ecosystems, was not matched again for millions of years. The world became, temporarily, a simpler place. But simplicity also means opportunity. Fewer competitors, fewer predators, open niches waiting to be filled. And for the lineages that survived, this was a chance to experiment, to try new forms. New strategies, new ways of living. And they did. The Triassic period, strange as it was also a time of innovation. The first dinosaurs emerged. The first pterosaurs took to the air. The first true mammals scurried through the underbrush. The first ichthyosaurs returned to the sea, evolving from land-dwelling reptiles into streamlined, fish-like predators. None of these groups existed before the Great Dying. They couldn't have. The ecological space wasn't there. But in the aftermath, in the vast emptiness left by the extinction, there was room for new experiments. And evolution, patient and relentless, filled that room. So the Great Dying, as terrible as it was, also served as a kind of reset, a clearing of the board, a moment when the old rules were suspended and new ones could be written. That doesn't make it good. It doesn't justify the loss, but it does complicate the narrative, because catastrophes are not purely destructive. They also create. They open doors that were previously closed. They make possible things that were previously impossible. And that's part of what makes studying mass extinctions so strange. You're looking at death on an unimaginable scale, but you're also looking at birth, at the origins of new lineages, new ecosystems, new worlds. The two are inseparable, the destruction and the creation, and the ending and the beginning. It's like watching a forest burn. The immediate impact is devastating. Flames consuming trees that took centuries to grow, animals fleeing or dying, entire ecosystems reduced to ash. But if you come back years later, you see something different. New growth, seedlings sprouting from the ash-enriched soil, species that thrive in open, sunny environments, species that couldn't survive in the dense, shady forest, now flourishing. The fire was destructive, but it also renewed. The Earth operates on similar principles, but the timescales are longer. The fires are metaphorical most of the time, and the renewal takes millions of years instead of decades. But the pattern is the same: destruction followed by renewal, death followed by rebirth, extinction followed by diversification. And we are the product of that pattern. We exist because of the extinctions that came before, because the dinosaurs died and the mammals had their chance, because the synapsids lost their dominance and the archosaurs rose, because the trilobites vanished and new marine ecosystems emerged. Every extinction is someone's tragedy and someone else's opportunity. And we are the descendants of the opportunists, the ones who thrived in the aftermath, the ones who filled the empty spaces. That should make us humble, because we are not the end point of evolution. We are not the culmination of some grand plan. We are just another experiment, another branch on the tree of life. And like every other branch, we could be pruned at any moment. The Earth doesn't care whether we're here or not. It will continue its cycles with or without us. Continental drift, volcanic eruptions, climate oscillations, ice ages, warm periods. The planet has been through it all before, and it will go through it all again. But we care. We care whether we're here, whether our children are here, whether the world we know, the world we love, persists into the future. And that caring, that attachment, is what drives us to study events like the Great Dying, not out of morbid curiosity, but out of a desire to understand, to learn, to see the patterns and recognize when we're approaching similar thresholds. Because the Great Dying is not just ancient history, it's a case study, a natural experiment in what happens when planetary systems are pushed too far. And the results of that experiment are written in stone, available for anyone willing to look. And what they show is sobering. They show that the Earth can enter states that are fundamentally incompatible with complex life, states where the atmosphere and oceans and climate all shift in ways that make survival nearly impossible. And once those states are entered, the path back is measured in geological time. We are currently pushing the Earth in similar directions, not as fast as the Siberian traps, not as extreme, not yet, but the trajectory is similar. Carbon dioxide rising, oceans acidifying, temperatures climbing, feedback loops beginning to activate. And the question is whether we'll recognize the warning signs in time, whether we'll change course before we reach the point of no return. Whether we'll be the species that learned from the past and avoided repeating its mistakes, or whether we'll be another data point, another extinction event, another boundary layer in the rock record. The scientists who study the Great Dying don't have the answers. They have data, evidence, models, hypotheses, but they don't have a crystal ball. They can't tell us exactly what will happen if we continue on our current path. There are too many variables, too many uncertainties, too many feedback loops that are poorly understood. But they can tell us the risks. They can show us what's happened before. They can point to the mechanisms that drove the worst extinction in Earth's history and say, look, these are still active. These can still happen. And some of them are happening now. And then it's up to us to decide what to do with that information, whether to act on it or ignore it, whether to change our behavior or continue as we are. That's not a scientific question, that's a human question. A question of values and priorities and what we're willing to sacrifice in the short term to avoid catastrophe in the long term. And it's a hard question because the sacrifices are real, changing energy systems, altering consumption patterns, rethinking economic models. These are not trivial asks. They're difficult, complex, politically fraught challenges that don't have easy solutions. But the alternative is worse. The alternative is continuing down a path that leads, eventually, to a world that looks more like the early Triassic, simplified, degraded, hostile to the forms of life we value.
And once we're on that path, once we've crossed certain thresholds, there's no quick way back. The Earth will recover, yes, but not on timescales that matter to us, not in our lifetimes, not in our children's lifetimes.
Not for hundreds of generations. So the choice is stark. Act now with intention and foresight, or suffer later with consequences that compound over time. And the Great Dying, sitting there in the rock record, 252 million years in the past, whispers its warning, quietly, persistently, to anyone willing to listen. It says, this can happen, this has happened, and it can happen again. Not in the same way, not from the same causes, but the mechanisms are universal. The physics and chemistry of planetary systems don't change. Carbon dioxide warms the planet, regardless of whether it comes from volcanoes or from burning fossil fuels. Oceans acidify, regardless of the source of the carbon. Oxygen levels drop when photosynthetic organisms die, regardless of why they're dying. The details differ, but the patterns repeat. And that's the real lesson of the Great Dying. Not that we're doomed, not that catastrophe is inevitable, but that the Earth operates according to principles that don't care about our intentions or our desires. It responds to inputs, energy, carbon, heat, and when those inputs shift beyond certain ranges, the system destabilizes. We are currently providing those inputs. We are the Siberian traps of the modern era. Not as dramatic, not as explosive, but persistent, relentless. Year after year, pouring carbon into the atmosphere, warming the planet, acidifying the oceans. And the Earth is responding. Not as quickly as it did during the Great Dying. The processes are slower this time. But they're moving in the same direction. And if we don't change course, if we don't reduce those inputs, then eventually the Earth will reach a new equilibrium, a new stable state, one that might not include us. That's not alarmism, that's physics, that's chemistry, that's the logic of complex systems pushed beyond their stable ranges. And the Great Dying is our reminder of what that looks like, what it costs, what it takes to recover. It's a warning written in stone, a message from deep time, a voice from the worst day Earth has ever had, saying, be careful, be thoughtful, be wise, because the planet will survive. It always has. But whether we survive with it, whether the world we know persists, depends on the choices we make now. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. The survivors of the Permian Triassic extinction didn't have that luxury. They couldn't choose to prevent the catastrophe. They could only endure it. But we can choose. We have foresight. We have knowledge. We have the capacity to see what's coming and change direction. And that capacity is our greatest advantage, our greatest responsibility, our greatest test. The Great Dying ended 252 million years ago, but its lessons remain, etched in stone, waiting to be read, waiting to be understood, waiting to guide us, if we let them, away from the edge and toward a future where life, in all its complexity and beauty, continues. Not because it's guaranteed, but because we chose it, actively, deliberately, with full awareness of what's at stake. That's the story we're writing, right now, in this moment. And the ending isn't determined yet. It's still ours to decide.